Morning and welcome to Sherwood Forest Public Board Directors Meeting for September. Nice as always to have people here in person, but of course recognising that we are still maintaining our infection control and so social distancing of the board and face masks continue. But to welcome to all colleagues here in the room and those who are joining us online today. Can I start with apologies for absence, and I believe we've got Andrew Rose Britton, Non-Exec Director, who is currently on a charitable walk at the moment, Dr. Ali Rashid, one of our Non-Executive Directors, and Manjeet Gill, another Non-Exec Director. All apologies for today. David Ainsworth, I believe that's all of our apologies for today. Any declarations of interest not previously declared or none? Okay. Minutes of meeting held on the 4th of August. Those have previously been circulated. Can we agree those as a true record, please? Yeah, okay, yeah. Thank you. And any matters arising from those? None. And Chair's report. Can I encourage you, can I ask first of all, take it as read, the Chair's report? Any questions from that? None. Or any issues? And you'll note the separate Council of Governors highlight report from our meeting in August and the issues that were raised on that. So both of those are provided for assurance. There's no questions or comments. I will move swiftly on to the Chief Executive report. Over to you.
Thank you. Morning, everyone. Reports. The report's read. Two highlights just to throw out. We've done our preparations for winter planning and a whole trust response to keeping patients safe and supporting colleagues, and we'll have more discussions around that later in the agenda. And then secondly, many congratulations to the leadership and the whole team of Little Millers Nursery, now rated good following the recent Ofsted inspection. It was really good that the board could meet with the leadership team and see their progress last month. Take any questions on the report. So before I move to the ICS update on behalf of David, who's noted his apologies. Yes. Okay, so in terms of the Integrated Care Board, there's been no board meeting since we last met, so no update on board progress. A couple of national requirements that become into the purview of Integrated Care Board, and that's the indication of the ICB's role in system performance management, indeed advising NHS England on outcomes framework scores and also, for example, performance managing individual partners on wait times, another key metric. So we'll wait to see how that will evolve. There is a system quarterly review meeting with NHS England next week, so I think more details will be available for that meeting. There's also the Integrated Care Board's requirement for putting together a strategy. That strategy needs to be in place by December, and it will be developed alongside partners. There are workshops being put in place for September and October, and it's developed in line with the Health and Wellbeing Board's Joint Service Needs Assessment. So that's how the Integrated Care Board and the Health and Wellbeing Board's business comes together into a single plan for the Integrated Care Board. Provide a collaborative at scale. Cathy McLean and Amanda Sullivan visited the chairs and chief execs Provide a collaborative at scale meeting and noted the good progress that was being made. Cathy, whilst noting good progress, is never satisfied with just good progress, and described her ambition for Provide a collaborative across Nottinghamshire to be an exemplar. And we all obviously shared that ambition. Anthony May takes up his role as Nottingham University Hospital's Chief Executive this week, and Anthony, as part of that, takes up the Provider Collaborative Lead Executive role, so I look forward to meeting and working with Anthony as he moves forward. There is one of the key areas that the Provider Collaborative is working on is a workforce workstream, and HR directors have agreed 3 strategic areas in which work will focus, and that's around passporting for staff, alignment of terms and conditions, and reducing agency spend. And then just lastly on Provider Collaborative, a further non-executive director event is being planned. I believe that's for the end of September, early October time. I was rather hoping people might look at they had dates in their diaries, but I'm not seeing any of that. But I'm assured that planning is taking place. Just moving again, Amanda and Kathy visited the Bellamy estate as part of their visits to each place partnership, and they were really pleased to see Bellamy estate work that had been done by the Nottinghamshire Place Partnership and seen as good practice for tackling health inequalities partnership work. And then lastly, just to note that we continue the discussions and work with Nottingham Trent University and West Knox College in developing partnership opportunities and further opportunities to develop educational and employment routes for the local population.
Thank you. Any questions? Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's move on then to our strategic objective 1, to provide outstanding care, and we'll have a maternity update over to Phil.
Thank you, Chair. Paul has kindly joined us as well.
Yes.
So the first paper is the Maternity Neonatal Safety Champions Report. Whilst I'll take it as read, I would like to pull out a few key points. Really pleased with the service user voice role that Sarah Seddon is developing. You've met Sarah at previous board. It's going from strength to strength and really well received by our parents and our staff. Sarah designed an infographic which we put in the appendix there, which I think is really useful and just shows some of the key feedback and things that she's gathering. In terms of engagement, we've had 2 formal maternity safety champion walk-arounds alongside the other informal visits we do. Real positive feel at the moment, although staff are very clear in articulating the pressure and the workload. There's also been some slightly better days. I think it would be right to say Paula, with less activity, and staff have really appreciated that reduction in pressure, giving them time to focus on some of the other things that they feel they've not been able to do. We've been talking with them about things such as the re-implementation of the home birth service, making sure that people feel comfortable and ready and prepared for that, and also a lot of focus on what are the different routes available for them to speak up. So we've got the Freedom to Speak Up group, we've got various other forums within there and other staff members as well, so big focus on that. In terms of the Ockenden 1, you'll be aware of the 7 EIAs, 6 are fully compliant as we told you previously, the remaining ones are 84% compliance now. And Ockenden 2, we still await that national guidance on how we're going to report and gather information, but we've taken that decision to use the same framework we did for Ockenden 1 in the interim period, and we've now peer assessed 14 of the 15 EIAs, and we'll have a further discussion and share that preliminary findings at private board and bring something back to the public board. And the last point of note, the SCORE survey, which we mentioned we were going to be doing, we've had to delay that. This is due to the fact we're doing the National Staff Survey will be out in October. In September, we've also got our Pathway to Excellence survey running. We felt running 3 surveys in one department would not be appropriate, and we'll also be able to gather rich intelligence from those 2 surveys that are taking place. I'll pause there, and myself and Paul are happy to take questions or comments.
Yes, Barbara.
Really more a comment than a question. It was just good to see the trend going in the right direction about smoking at time of delivery, which is great.
Yeah.
A really good move towards health inequalities, as we know this is a key factor. So I look forward to seeing a really good trend continuing on that.
Yeah, hopefully. And the work that's been ongoing. So we, SFH, we bid for an early implementer site work. So back in December last year, we started that work, and we're using the Manchester model. So we're one of 3 sites across the country that are using this model, and we've had really successful outcomes so far. And we're now starting to see the data to support that. So like you say, Barbara, it's not just the pregnancy, it's that ongoing the health for the family and the child. So yeah, been really positive so far.
I'll take the
Yes, Steve.
Sorry, Phil. It's just a question for either of you, really. So the CQC rating 2019 was that right?
Yes.
Good to see it all good and or outstanding. Given the emphasis has been put on this work and the surveys about excellence, I'm just wondering whether longer term, is it your aim to try and move any of those ratings any higher? Because a lot of Ockenden, clearly, it'll help cement where we are, and I hope we're at least as good as then. But do you want to go any further, and if so, which domain would you choose?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to start, Paul. I think something we're really keen to do is a bit of that gap analysis, or that Cqc readiness. 2019 is a long time ago, and I think it's really important we don't rest on our laurels and assume that's where we still are. A lot of the Ockenden work is making sure we have a real strong focus on a lot of the domains, but there's something about cross-referencing that, and we're about to start a whole round of CQC inspections in maternity services. So I think the bit we're keen to do is triangulate all those different requirements and perhaps benchmark and get some peer support from other organisations to benchmark each other. Where are we? If you came in tomorrow, where do we think we'd be?
So yeah, the LMS have already started part of that for us. So the LMS are performing quality and site visits. So we have had just one so far. They're using the same format as what the CQC inspection would be. Likewise, the regional team are also performing Ockenden peer assessments. We have ours on the 4th of October. And like Phil says, we're going to hopefully triangulate those, and we can look at areas where we feel there's areas we can strengthen, but also areas of excellence, we can focus on those. We know particularly last time around our bereavement was a part of the outstanding care, so it's looking at those specialist services that we provide, and is there any more that we can put forward. I think the early implementer site work is a good example of what we've used our local data, so we know we've had a very high for a long time proportion of smoking at time of delivery, so that's why we've put that bid funding forward. So I think that's another area that would showcase outstanding.
Okay, thank you.
And in terms of obviously Ockenden continuing over at Nottingham, are we also working with our colleagues over there to share at early stages wherever possible anything that we might also be able to learn from? Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we're in regular contact with Nottingham at the moment, and we're speaking. Obviously, we've had a big focus on staff support again this week because it's been very obviously high in the media again. But yes, so we will be speaking with those. The LMNS have supporting Nottingham very heavily as well, and they'll be sharing across the system because we know that they'll be sharing a lot of information for sharing that quite quickly.
Key things like, we share all our incidents, we share our learning. I think my personal experience of sort of system working, the LMNS is a real example of something that's quite mature and well formed, and you meet a lot more regularly than we do. Myself and Dave meet regularly as well, don't we?
Yes, well, I was just going to maybe comment. I just wondered whether to offer an invite to any of the NEDs that would like to attend the LMNS to just observe what's discussed and the level of the collaboration and the conversation. I think that might be quite helpful. Sort of put that out, and maybe Phil and I would be happy to facilitate that if NEDs would welcome that.
Andy.
So it's really good to see the smoking figures. I'm just wondering, are we sort of doing a bit more? So it's great people are stopping at delivery, but are we then handing that on into the community?
Yeah.
And are we taking the opportunity to look at things like breastfeeding rates as well once we've got that contact with people?
Yeah, definitely. So with the smoking, so what we have just secured some additional funds from the LMNS for is the incentivisation. So this is about stretching that smoking cessation past the point of delivery. So we know that it works well in Manchester, so we've currently got that funding. They've started that.
and I've asked Claire, who's leading on it. It's Claire's working in conjunction with our DNO colleagues, so it's stretching out much further than just that point of delivery and obviously immediate postpartum. So once we get that data, we'll bring it back to our Safety Champions paper, but the initial success rates have been really positive. And yes, we will be looking at breastfeeding. So that's part of our BFI Gold work that we are doing. We are looking at how we can increase those rates. We know particularly smoking and breastfeeding rates within our population in Sherwood has been very difficult over the years, but we've got our infant feeding team now that support work in the community. So hopefully we're trying to increase that rate as well.
Steve, did you want to come back in?
That's okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Moving on to the Quality Surveillance Scorecard, and pick out a few key points. We've been mentioning over the past 2 months the 3rd, 4th degree tears. They've reduced below the national threshold. Similarly with the stillbirth rate, that's also reduced. We conducted 1 home birth despite not having a full home birth service. It's good to note that, and we're still on track for the 18th of September and go live with a full home birth service. And down at the bottom, it's really important to note there our increased birth rate for July, 316 births. That's a huge increase, and that brings a lot of pressure and ongoing resource before and after the actual birth, so that's significant. Still waiting feedback from our continuity of care submission, which again I did flag with board. We'll bring something back when we receive that to discuss the options moving forward, but we've had no response as of yet. And 2 cases reported as moderate harm this month. 1 required no further action, which was born before arrival, and the second one was an unplanned admission to ICU following a C-section. They're both going through our usual governance processes. To pause there and again take comments or questions.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Paula. See you later. Are we due to be joined by Martin?
No,
You're doing.
I'm sad to report that Martin's, or not sad, Martin's just back from holiday, so the disappointment the board will have, I'm afraid, is that I'm going to present this report first. That's all right.
Over to you, Dave.
Thanks. So I'll take this paper of read. I've, for the keen-eyed of you, I've slightly adjusted the layout, and I've adjusted some of the language, which I hope makes it clearer. It relates to the exception reports that were for the period 1st of May to the 31st of July 2022, and it includes some quantitative and some qualitative data. As described in the report, there are 40 exception reports, 35 relate to extra hours worked, 3 are educational issues, and 2 relate to service support. Of note, there are 4 reports which were categorised by the postgraduate trainees as immediate safety concerns. I can update board that 3 of these have been closed as not representing immediate safety concern, and 1 is open, and the detail is in the paper about some of the progress with that. Of the 40 reports that we've received, 75% have been closed, and there is again in the paper some detail around the 25% or 10 reports that are still open. I would again remind board that the time to the initial meeting to review these exception reports has been certainly a concern of mine. It's been beyond what is recommended, but we've started to see some improvement from that, and the median time to the first meetings, as described in the report, is now 2 days, which I think is really very commendable. In terms of the outcomes of the when these reports are submitted, predominantly the outcomes are for the postgraduate doctors to have time off in lieu. You'll remember that we don't have a mechanism where we can close that loop and check whether that's happening, because of our electronic systems don't give us that facility, but we've been working with our colleagues in HR, and we're undertaking this manually to try and categorise the number of toil awards that are then taken, and we'll bring that data back as we get more mature about that. The majority of the reports, which is no different to previous reports, occur in medicine, around 62-63%, and it relates to the on-call shifts happening in the urgent and emergency care, the acute medicine shifts, which is where the majority of the activity is felt. Again, the majority of the reports are with our Foundation Year 1 and Foundation Year 2 doctors, and in the report there's some benchmarking data around some of the yearly comparisons of that for you. Board will also remember we've been actively trying to target our more senior trainees to exception report, and there's some initial shoots, I'd maybe describe them now, but this may be occurring, although the numbers are very small, but we've seen some slight improvement. We've also seen 16 exception reports from our clinical fellows. This is something that we see as a quality marker for Sherwood, and encourage that we treat these clinical fellows as identical to our postgraduate trainee doctors. It's not mandated, it's something that we do, but involves our desire, or recognises our desire, to blend the workforce and to support the workforce going forward. So I guess the take-home messages I'd highlight that we've got an embedded process. It seems to be working well, it's robust. We've got an increasing presence across our clinical fellows. We have low numbers of senior trainees exception reporting, but we've seen that slight increase, as I mentioned. The initial meeting time has shown some improvement, but there's still work to do, and there's some actions described that the Guardian of Safe Working will undertake around that. And finally, there's some reflection of what we use this data for. So there's an example of where we're reviewing, adjusting and improving the rota for our postgraduate trainees, and that description again is in the paper. And then finally, I'd probably just highlight two final things. Following an exit interview with our last chief registrar, it became apparent that we don't share this board report with our trainees, although it is public papers, and so we will actively take this report and share it at the junior doctors forums that we have to ensure that actually there is some understanding and knowledge of how we treat exception reports and the importance of which we see that. So I think that's a positive move. And then the final bit, I'd just say, you'll note that in the document I have tried to alter some of the language. I've tried to move away from the perhaps historic terminology of junior doctors, and this is they're a core component of our competent medical workforce, and I've tried to reflect that in the report. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dave. I mean, I think it's very helpful actually, both for the board and indeed for the wider public, to be able to explain what those terms are and those different categories of grades of doctors. I'm just noticing that there were probably a slightly disproportionate number of reports around hours and just general sort of busyness and work pressures in trauma and orthopaedics. Is that something, and that's across all grades, so is that something that we are concerned about generally, and not just for our trainee doctors or different grades of, that we would perhaps call junior doctors, but those different grades? Or is there something else that we need to look at in terms of the organisation of that particular speciality?
I suspect there's a bit of both in there, Claire, Chair. I think we've had some pointers towards trauma and orthopaedics over the past 2 or 3 exception reports. We've had a number in there. When we've investigated those, really we haven't found underlying systemic issues. Having said that, what we've done, and you'll see that one of these is specifically remains as a patient safety issue. I think that we are doing some work there, reviewing all of those rotas, understanding how the rotas are designed, but not just that, it's about the way that we're working as a team across there, and we'll bring some updates around that as we undertake that work.
Okay, thank you. Graham.
Just really building on that rota side of it and the medical rota, it would be good to hear something back about how that's gone, rather than just waiting for a reduction in exception reports for those areas, but actually to get some feedback from the junior doctors about whether the changes have worked or if there's anything else to feedback. But overall, I thought it was a good paper, and yeah, thank you for the changes, because it makes it a lot easier to follow and understand, so much appreciated. But it's just to get on the proactive side of understanding whether it's making a difference or not.
Yeah, no, that's helpful, and we'll do that. I guess the only thing I just flagged to us is that there can be a degree of short-termism in here if people are rotating every 4 or 6 months.
Yeah.
Having said that, it's the longevity, and certainly aspects in terms of our GMC data coming back, and our internal spot data around the medical education should give us some of that information, and we bring that back to the people committee.
Andy.
Thanks, Dave. So again, I'd echo Graham's reports. Dave, thanks, and commend the work on clinical fellows. I think it's really, really important. I suppose one of the things that we made some rota changes around was out of hours cover in senior trainees, because we had concerns about their workload, and the fact that we're seeing some reporting that maybe it's not as prevalent as we'd like. I just wondered how we might get an update on, as Graham was saying, the impact of the changes on those senior trainees out of hours. We've probably had 2 rotations now since we introduced the change. I think it'd be good to hear some feedback about how that's worked, because clearly they're very important for us in terms of cover and potential future consultants for us. So knowing how those changes have worked is important.
Yes, I might bring Robin in somewhere in the midst of this, but so there's a number of aspects there, I think. So when we significantly invested in the medical side of the rotas, one of the drivers for that was that we were really struggling to attract short-term bank work when we had gaps in our rotas, so to cover sickness or additional activity. So we weren't being competitive, if you like, in the marketplace. Now, some of that is obviously financially driven, but the other messages we got was that because it was the rota was so onerous that people really didn't feel as though it was an attractive locum slot to come and work for, and we were losing out to some of our other local organisations. I think that was a really stark message, and I think we did well to heed that. Since we've changed that feedback has dramatically altered now, and we are sort of filling those rotas, and the feedback from the senior trainees, particularly via the chief registrar, is that the mood, if you like, in the camp is much better. I think there's still high activity, and we'll talk about some of that when we get to the SOF. Still very high activity. It's still exceptionally busy. We're still functioning as though we're in the deepest, darkest components of winter. We don't seem to have winter and summer now. All of those aspects. But in terms of our ability to attract people to help fill the gaps because of the changing rota, that's been markedly different. I think the other aspect around the recruitment side of things is again, it's a powerful statement. So we don't conduct formalised exit interviews when trainees leave us, because it's part of a rotation, but what we do is we do ask for feedback around their time here, and we capture that, and we obviously act on that. We have done probably better than anticipated relatively recently in terms of attracting local trainees, although we have had a number of disappointments, I would say. So I think, your point is really well made. I don't know, Rob, if you wanted to.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I think a couple of bits just to complement that conversation. One of the very strong sets of feedback we've had from groups of individuals within that cohort you described, Andy. Is that balance around well-being? That individuals feel that there's a better work-life balance attributed to better proportion of shift distribution, better opportunity to finish on time or get away in a timely manner, and that's been really powerful through the JDF etc. around what it's meant to them as individuals, particularly around how they can balance that study with the opportunities of experience. And I think the other bit to complement that is the keen drive for us to always seek feedback. So that rotation that Dave touched on, we will be seeking out kind of questionnaires to anecdotally get, is this making a difference? Some of the rota change we've done is, I think we're in week 5 at the moment, so we need to recognise it's still early days, but the rota and the rostering teams are certainly describing that it's making positive impact. So I think initial indicators are positive, but as you've rightfully said, it'd be useful perhaps through a next report we can capture some of that feedback just to provide greater visibility of the impact of these changes.
Perhaps there's a learning point in there, Claire, because I guess that was quite a big investment case, wasn't it? So have we done a formal lessons learned from it? Or would that come up through people committee? Maybe it's just worth a thought.
Barbara.
It was another point, Claire.
Oh, okay. Is there anything else following on from?
So just two things in terms of the lessons learned. We did bring that through previous reports about some of the lessons that we learned from the rota change and the impact that had and some of the feedback. So we did surveys before and then we did surveys after. We have delivered that information. I think we did have a conversation at board. I think it was probably in private board last month in terms of some of the changes that we've been undertaking or plan to undertake in the medical education team. And one of the things that I think we discussed and highlighted was that, again, to helping us to reflect on the changes that we need, some of our other local organisations have invested significantly in what was Rob was describing around the pastoral support side of the medical education team. So not the traditional rotoring, perhaps not the traditional business as usual, but just something more around actually a friendly ear to talk to help sort out problems. And that's probably something that we've got a gap on and we've started to consider how we might address that.
Thanks, Dave. So slightly different line of questions, really. So it was good to see there was an increase of, I think you said, 11 postgraduate trained doctors in training. But I noted that there's still a gap in the region of 16. I just wondered what you think we'd need to do differently to be able to effectively close that gap.
Have significant conversations with our colleagues at Health Education England East Midlands, such that they sent us trainees for those gaps. So these are posts that we have available that we're not getting doctors rotated into. So
is there anything that we as the board can do to facilitate and enable a more effective conversation with the NHSEI, which I understand have now taken on those responsibilities? Because obviously this is great, the trend's going in the right way, but we've got a little way to go, haven't we?
Yeah, but this is quite historic in that often we get and it would depend which organisation you're sitting in. Most organisations will feel a bit hard done by, but if someone is leaving a rotation, so if they're coming towards the end, then that may create a natural gap in the rotation, and that natural gap has to go somewhere, because there isn't it isn't like necessarily a complete conveyor belt. So if a trainee gets a consultant job, for example, in September, then that gap might run all the way, and they leave in September, let's say, it might run all the way through to the next rotation, which might be February, it might be August. So someone has to take that gap, and the HE will do their utmost to make sure that's fair. But always, as DDAs, always we will feel the brunt of that, but we will see more gaps perhaps than we would welcome.
So,
So there are some logistics there that we have no control over.
so I take the point about the logistics and where people get consultant posts and CCT dates and gaps and so on, but I suppose I'm just interested if there's anything effectively that we as the board can do about filling the gaps that arise at the start of that cycle, if you like.
Yeah, and again, you'll see in the paper that of those gaps we have filled them with different members of the workforce team, and so we've only got 4 real gaps.
And that's great.
But in effect, what you're talking about is over recruiting to those posts such that we don't see those gaps.
Is that what is? That's the only solution, to over recruit to address them.
Well, so you had floating trainees in effect that you could move into any of those gaps.
And is that something that is feasible and that we could reasonably do? I mean, I'm just mindful these are our future workforce, aren't they? And, you know, if they come here, hopefully if they like the experience they get here, we're doing things to encourage, then they're our future, you know, more sustainable workforce. So just curious if there's things we can do, and whether the fact that HEMA's gone and responsibilities transferred, whether that gives us some opportunities to have conversations that, you know, previously we weren't able to.
Why don't we bring some information back on what constitutes those 16 gaps?
Okay.
So some of them will be choice, that people will get allocated a rotation and decide they don't want to come. Some of it will be, as I said, the gaps that happen, and there'll be a host of other reasons. Yeah. But let's bring that data back. Maybe if we bring that into the next report, that would be helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
I think the other context of this, we've seen an improved picture, as you touched on, Barbara, in regards to the amount of gaps that they do reduce. We've also seen this year the greatest number of placements that we've ever had at Sherwood. So that pipeline you touch on is an improving pipeline.
Yeah, sure.
I think some of the difficulties we have with Health Education England is the details of the actual numbers sometimes are a little unclear, and we can be notified at a very late stage, sometimes due to you know, colleagues failing exams, for instance, or wanting to defer years depending on personal circumstances. What we've always tried to do is preempt some of that. Clinical fellow program's been a prime example of how we can then buffer the gap, and as Dave rightfully said, that gap's then as minimal as possible. What I am keen to do is to ensure that, you know, we get our fair proportion where there are gaps, that, you know, we're not always disadvantaged, and as Dave rightfully said, any opportunity we have just to influence Health Education England, we take to ensure, you know, they're mitigated as best as possible.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dave. On to our strategic objective 3, maximising the potential of our workforce. So it follows on quite nicely the discussion we've just had, and over to you, Rob.
Thank you, Chair. So if it's okay, Chair, I'll present both reports and then open up for questions, because they are linked. So a bit of context. These are mandatory requirements for us as an NHS provider. The 2 reports are our requirements to publish information in October around our progress against key workforce metrics, and also data taken from the annual staff survey. Principally, these are capturing experiences of our BME colleagues and colleagues that are identified as a disability here at Sherwood. So I'll take the reds first. So that's the workplace rate of quality standard. There are 9 indicators, and we've seen some improvements in one of those indicators, minimal change in 5, and a slight decline in 3. What I wanted to focus on are some of the highlights. So the paper goes into demonstrating where we've seen some progress in the past 12 months. I think one of the areas of increase is the amount of colleagues within the organisation that are identified as BME. We've seen some real improvements in individuals at band 7 and 8A in non-clinical roles, and individuals at band 6 in clinical roles. So a really improving picture there. We've also seen some excellent progress in regards to colleagues that that have been able to access training, particularly around some of that CPD stuff. That was highlighted in the National Res report, and we continue to make progress around the likelihood of appointments with individuals from a BME background compared to white colleagues, and we continue to make positive impacts around aspects of formal process. So there's a bit of a theme between both here in regards to the just restorative culture work that we've done across Sherwood, particularly around individuals' likelihood of going into processes, and we perform particularly well there. Clearly there's always work to be done, and I recognise there's some key pillars of work that we've started at Sherwood that we need to continue to build on. So the anti-racism strategy is a key pillar. We're doing continued collaboration with some of our local partners, particularly with David being in place. There's an opportunity to do things at place, particularly challenging some of that violence and aggression agenda, where we often see unfortunate examples of racism in the workplace, which no doubt is an area we continue to want to make progress against. There's the embedding of the national 6 high impact actions, and clearly ongoing work around education, development, how individuals access support, and more importantly, how we ensure continuation of fair and equitable recruitment processes. I'll move on to the WDES, which is the Workforce Disability Equality Standard. 10 indicators here, of which there are 14 data scores. And I think it's fair to say we've made more improvement in this area, 6 areas in particular, 4 of which there's been kind of minimal change and 4 slight decline. Again, some key highlights. We've continued to see an increase in data source, so that's encouraging to see individuals are continuing to disclose that they feel comfortable about sharing their disability. I touched on the just culture stuff, and there's a real theme here around fair and equitable processes, particularly around the likelihood of individuals with a disability entering a formal process. And we continue to make positive steps around colleagues feeling they have equal opportunities for progression, which again is very positive. As mentioned, there's always stuff to be done on this agenda. A lot of this will be linked to the health passport that we're introducing, that gives individuals that visibility about reasonable adjustments they have in the workplace, and that being portable not only across Sherwood but also across the system. We continue to want to have focus around disability history, and we'll take a month later in the year to do so. And one thing I'm particularly proud of is the project search. We've got our first intake of 7 individuals, and that's in partnership with West Notts College we've got, and we continue to want to build that relationship, as Paul touched on earlier on today's agenda. So a fair bit to still do, and I think there's that acknowledgement that we've made some progress, and we continue to want to make that progress. We've got some time at the next People Committee to talk a little bit about how these actions are linked to the relaunch of the staff networks that we've done over the last month, the introduction of equality ambassadors that we want to further cement, and obviously all of this is linked to the people and culture strategy that we launched earlier in the year. Recently we've had the first draft of the Ready to Talk, Ready to Listen sessions that we ran earlier in the year. Once we've started to work through that data, that will clearly play a key component in some of the actions attributed to the RES and the DES. So I'll pause there. Happy to open up to questions.
Sure. I mean, one of the areas I think stood out for me was the increase in the percentage of staff experiencing harassment and bullying, and where that's gone over the last few years, and how we were able to obviously successfully reduce that, and now we're starting to see that increase again. Is that in the context of a wider increase in bullying and harassment across all staff as well, from relatives and patients and public? And what impact do we think our campaign and the poster campaign that we've now got across the trust is doing in terms of reducing and maybe raising awareness on some of that?
Yeah, a couple of initial thoughts, Claire. One, we've made it more visible. I think the poster campaign and the approaches we've had has encouraged individuals to speak up. We've seen increased indatics around difficult circumstances. And a piece of work, and I'll bring Grandma in a moment, which is linked to the staff surveys around that wider kind of violence and aggression agenda that we have across the organisation. So not predominantly just Liz linked to aspects here, but all strands of how, unfortunately, individuals, colleagues come up with difficulties in the workplace. One of the things we are taking forward is something called after action review. After an incident, what's the wraparound support for individuals to make sure that they get the appropriate support timely in regards to be able to deal those when those situations present themselves.
Thank you.
Anything to add, Emma?
Yeah, thank you, Rob. So yeah, I would further add, with regards to the increase of bullying, harassment, violence and aggression from members of the public and users, we've started conversations at a community level because we recognise that there's a cultural change element to this at the community level. So we're working with all partners about having more shared messages, shared approach and consistent response for any form of abuse, violence, no matter whether that's in a GP practice, could be in a local health centre or the hospital, because we recognise our investment in training, educating and supporting colleagues and posters go so far, but actually it needs to be from the community, and that's where we're forming this civic partnership to try and help reduce and do it together rather than standalone organisations. So that's the step that we are taking with that. But continue to link in with Phil, who's the chief nurse, around the violence reduction policy and making sure what we have in place at Sherwood is compliant and provides safe care for colleagues.
Okay, thank you. On this particular issue, because I've got quite a lot.
Yeah, just to
Okay.
like whatever. We have
I'll
seen
fill and then I'll bring you.
some really complex and challenging patients recently. Some of the most challenging patients I've seen in my 30 years. And that's involved staff being assaulted verbally, physically. And we're seeing more of those patients. And I think it's key that we don't normalise and accept that. And that's the bit about people are reporting more. That doesn't mean we haven't got a bigger problem now. People are reporting it, and we don't just normalise it and say carry on with your shift. So people have had some significant trauma, and then we expect them to carry on with the rest of the day like nothing's happened. So that wraparound and the so what bit is really important.
Yeah, just building on that comment in the anti-racism strategy, really encouraged individuals to report and to speak out so that we could provide some signposting and some support for individuals. So I'm not surprised to see an increase in reporting, because that, whilst we didn't want to encourage further incidents to take place, we did want to ensure that staff felt supported by the organisation and felt that individual signposting and support to deal with that incident as it occurred. So it's one of those areas where an increase in reporting is a positive thing.
Yeah.
Hopefully, and we probably need to find out how to measure this, whether those individuals now feel that there's a wraparound support in place that actually is meaningful.
Steve, was it on this or?
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Overall comment, I think, first, if that's okay, it's good to see progress, and there's a very comprehensive plan. So it's good to see progress on a lot of areas, and I welcome the chance in October to dive in a bit more deeper into some of the network working, for example. I do think it's also worth pointing out that this isn't just patients' relatives. Our staff are just as likely to receive abuse, harassment, bullying from people who work here. And that's, as it says in the report, pretty much average. So we're in an average position compared to the country, whereas in lots of places we're better. And surely we can do more about that particular one. I fully buy into starting with the community. I absolutely understand that, but that must be more manageable. I'd also point out it's really good that I think through Freedom to Speak Up, we're hearing more about people are coming forward, which is great. But these numbers are last year's staff survey, aren't they? Which we're about to hear again. So this is 12 months out of date now. So we'll see what comes up next time. But I don't think this has always been anonymous, is my point. So I don't know if that speaking up culture will be making that difference. So it just feels like great areas of progress. It backs up the plan that we've got, But there do seem to be some areas we've really got to try and get under the skin of, and yeah, how much we can do that here and how much we can do that in October. I think it would be great to focus in on those points.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Bob.
So thanks for the report. So a couple of comments, please, to feed into next year's report, if I can sort of preempt another annual report. It would be good somewhere to have the overall numbers for both staff groups. It infers percentage increase, but it doesn't give you the quantum. I suspect these are both relatively small staff groups. So when you interpret the changes in data, I'm not sure how significant they are. So an overall quantum would be really helpful. And then to put that in the context of the community we serve. So I don't recall off the top of my head, perhaps I should, what the level of disability in our community is, but understanding how our profile of the staff we employ relates or compares to the broader community would be useful. Similarly around race, I think that just provides us a bit more strategic context and fits in with things like aspirations for us as an organisation, as an employer of choice and so on. So if that could be done for next year, please.
Appreciate the feedback.
But great to hear about the improvements that you've got planned.
Great, thank you. Dave, did you want to?
Well, it's just a couple of comments really, particularly around the racism side of things. So I think when we developed the poster, you remember this stemmed from some of the feedback we had from a trainee doctor called Darryl, and one of the comments that he sort of challenged us with really is that a poster is great, but actually it's about the actions, it's about really living this, it's about what do we do as an organisation. I think that's some of the conversation that we played out, and I think that's the key bit not to forget within all of this. And just on Steve's point, I think what I would say about Sherwood is that we do have quite a diverse workforce, particularly in the medical side. We have a really very diverse medical workforce, and that does not reflect our community. And there is a stark difference there. And we see that members of our community who come in as patients sometimes take that in a unhelpful way. Yeah. And I think that's why I think the education component of this into the community is really vital.
I think all your points you just made then, Dave, are really relevant and right, and agree with them. I see that at Queen Elizabeth exactly the same as well, where probably the difference is even greater. But just as a thought process, it's all well and good putting posters up, but changing our community and approach is really difficult to achieve. What I would actually like to see, and I don't know how we measure it or bring it in or put it in place, but it's about getting our staff to support. So if they see an incident happening, that they immediately step in to support that individual in that particular case and harassment, because that can make more of a change, both to the individual as being felt part of the organisation and supported, but also in helping making that cultural change a little bit. So for me, that's probably more important than having the posters, etc.
And in response to that, Graham, some of the ambassador work that we're starting to take forward is a prime example of where we can have advocates that can act on behalf of others when they see, I'll describe it as perhaps poor behaviours or poor practice, and act as an advocate for them. We recognise we're in the infancy of that, but that's an opportunity to take forward and strengthen some of those reflections you've shared.
Yeah, but the real time to do it is at a time when it's actually happening, that a colleague steps in at that time, not just after the event and supporting. It's about actually at the time of the incident.
Yeah, and I recognise we're in the infancy of that, and there's an opportunity to strengthen those opportunities for individuals to either get support, when the situation takes place, yeah, or afterwards, in regard to some of that wraparound support that I touched on earlier. It's a combination of both that we're actively taking forward.
Good.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Okay, so we're slightly ahead of time, and our patient story, the staff who are coming to deliver the patient story are not with us yet. So I'm going to move the agenda around a little bit, and we will go to item 13, which is the revised constitution, and take that one. So over to you, Shirley.
Thank you, Claire. So the governor's recently had some elections and all the posts weren't filled. So with some constituencies not receiving enough nominations and some receiving too many nominations. So the Council of Governors have agreed to revise the constitution so that the public constituencies for Mansfield, Ashfield and the rest of East Midlands are merged, and the staff governor constituencies for Kingsmill and Mansfield and Newark are also merged. So basically this leaves us with 2 public constituencies, Newark and Sherwood and the rest of East Midlands, and 1 staff constituency that's no longer site specific. So the constitution is in the papers. We've also had to remove paragraph 7.10.1.4 to allow the governors who were elected to remain in post. The trust solicitors have seen the constitution and have assured it's aligned with recent legislation. The Council of Governors approved it on the 9th of August, so it's for the board to approve before it goes forward finally to be approved by the annual general meeting on the 29th of September, unless obviously board have got any queries. Graham.
I'm going to not disagree with the concept at all. I'm recognising the reason why, but what I'm more concerned about is down the track that we actually lose a little bit of so staff representation, for instance. We don't get anybody at all from Newark because we can't. I know, but at least we keep pushing to try and get some. What I'm concerned about is if we change the constitution, we kind of lose that drive, and it's how we maintain the process to try and put extra to try and recruit in those hard to recruit from areas on our governors to stand up.
Yeah, so the 2 staff governors we've got, we sort of task those who speaking to their colleagues over at Newark to try to say this is what it's about being a governor and this is what we need you to do. So we're hoping that, we will promote it more at Newark, and the same with the constituencies, with public constituencies. So although we've merged them, we're trying to get out there to still get representation from those constituencies.
The important thing for me is that we maintain that on an ongoing basis, because it's easy to let that drift over time once the constitution was changed.
Absolutely. So you have to approve it?
Yeah.
Everyone else happy to approve? Yes. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claire.
And as we're still slightly ahead, perhaps we could do the emergency preparedness, resilience and response policy. I'm keen not to get into the single oversight framework until we can do it as one meaty discussion. So perhaps over to you, Rachel.
Thank you. So this is just an update on the policy. It doesn't have major changes to it from the previous one. 2 main ones centre around the board having a regular review of the DPRR capacity and resources. I've obviously only recently joined the organisation and picked up emergency planning as part of my portfolio, and I am making some changes and we'll be building a case to strengthen that team a little, but we're not quite there yet, but that's definitely an area that we will address to affect this policy. And the second is around learning from incidents, which I think we do have good processes in place in terms of debriefs and learning after incidents, but just that's a bit more formalised in the policy here. But otherwise I'll take it to Fred and happy to take any questions.
Okay. Any questions? Yes, Graham.
Just a general comment. Overall, I think Mark does an excellent job in this role, and extremely proactive throughout, particularly when we actually don't have to focus on something, and he organises and runs it really well. So very supportive of it.
I totally agree. He's carrying a lot though on his own, and it feels like a single point of failure for the organisation, which is why I just wanted to do a little bit of work around what do we need to wrap around him to make sure it's a more resilient. The resilience team has its own resilience, which at the moment I don't think it does.
Okay. Anyone else? The board happy to approve? Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. So I think I'm going to carry on with subcommittees now. We'll have the rest of the agenda done before our patient story. Charitable Funds Committee, Steve.
Yeah, sure. Do you want me to pan it out a bit? So?
No, just do as you need to do.
Read it word for word. So I'll take it as read, as you'd expect. Just highlight a couple of things that I hope the board will take. Although this isn't a formal subcommittee of this board, but I hope the board will take some assurance that the committee is looking to learn lessons from prior work, and in particular now it's good that the one-stop clinic for new breast care is open and is happening. But we intend to use our October committee to see if we can improve future implementation. And a particular highlight, I think, would be in terms of the Rita technology to provide screens and technology for people with dementia and to help them reminisce. It's good that idea came from the Dragon's Den process and has proved to be successful and is now being extended again. So it just reinforces a good approach to gaining ideas. So those are just the things I wanted to highlight. Happy to take any questions from anybody. Okay, thank you.
All good. Thank you very much. Okay. Right. There's still no sign of our patient story. No. Okay. We're a little bit early to be taking a break. Maybe
Do the outstanding.
we can't do the outstanding. Can we? I assume we can't do the outstanding service.
Team are here, I think. Team are here.
Good.
Debate the date of the next meeting otherwise.
I'll be doing any other business at some point. Aha, excellent. Lisa. Hello. Hello, welcome. And Laura.
Hi, yes,
Hello, welcome to the board. Would you like to come up to the front? So for our members of the public who may be watching, either in real time or in due course on a recorded, this is our patient story, which is a precious gift and organ donor's story, and we're joined by Lisa Milligan and Laura Collington. So I'm going to hand over to.
Can I just say two words by introduction?
Yes.
Yeah, if that's all right. So I'm really pleased as the chair of the organ donation committee to introduce members of our organ donation team. I think what I would say to board is this is a vital component of our work, our ability to impact and influence the lives of many people whose title. I would say, recognising I have a bit of history with this, the highly charged, the emotional conversations that occur around this process should really not be underestimated. They are the hardest conversations imaginable, and they're usually conveying a decision around withdrawal of life-sustaining treatment for someone's nearest and dearest, and then simultaneously broaching the subject around that most altruistic act, the gift of life. So that's a little bit of background that we sometimes just need to bear in mind. And I'll hand over to Laura and Lisa.
Well, we'd like to play the movie that we've made for you. Today, I'm going to tell you the story of Joy, a 53-year-old lady who was married with 2 teenage sons. Joy was admitted to the emergency department after being found collapsed at home. On arrival, she was deeply unconscious. She was intubated and ventilated and taken for a CT scan of her brain. The CT scan, unfortunately, showed she'd suffered a massive intracranial hemorrhage. The results of the CT scan were discussed with the neurosurgeons at Queen's Medical Centre, and they were of the opinion that there was very little that could be done for Joy. There was no surgical intervention that could alter a very poor outcome, and it was very likely that Joy was already brain dead. I spoke to Joy's family and I explained that she would be admitted to the intensive care unit for up to 72 hours of prognostication to see if there was any improvement in her condition. Once Joy had arrived in the intensive care unit, I spoke to the ICU nurses and asked them to contact the organ donation team, as Joy was potentially an organ donor. After 72 hours, there'd been no improvement in Joy's condition, and I spoke to her family once again and explained that we felt it was very likely that Joy was already brain dead, that we would have to undertake some tests to confirm this. Later that afternoon, we performed the tests, and sadly they confirmed that she was brain dead. We spoke with Joy's family again and explained this very sad news to them, and then I handed over to the specialist nurses for organ donation to explain the next steps in the process.
We admitted Joy from the ED department via the CT scanner. We then welcomed Joy's family to the unit and ensured that they understood entirely where we were in the processes involved in Joy's admission and offered them emotional support at this time. We also used the opportunity to find out who Joy is as a person. What does she like? What doesn't she like? And ensured that this was factored into her care while she was with us. It's an important part of my role to identify potential donors. A telephone call was made in which they asked for various clinical detail, Joy's past medical history and her current presentation, including recent blood gases, blood tests and any other relevant radiological investigations. As time went on, we ensured Joy had chest x-rays, physiotherapy and further blood tests. While our role very much involved continuing to give excellent care to Joy and support to her family, which included our amazing faith centre here at Kingsmill, Joy's family consented to organ donation. This meant that our excellent care continued for Joy and our care for her family in supporting them through this very difficult time. There's also a logistical side to our role, which is supporting the SNODs to engage with our colleagues in theatres.
Once referral has been received to the organ donation team, we will assess the suitability. One of the specialist nurses will then attend the intensive care unit, where conversations will be held with the doctor to make a plan to talk about organ donation with the family. Family discussions are held. We will discuss with them whether Joy had any known wishes to donate her organs and tissues, and any discussions that she may have had in life with her family. If there is no known wish for organ donation, then we can use the opt-out legislation or deemed consent. This is where we can presume Joy had no objection in her life to donate her organs and tissues. Ultimately, with the help from a specialist nurse, the family will be given information to help make the right decision for them as a family.
So the next steps involve taking an in-depth look at Joy's medical history and carrying out investigations to find out whether she would be suitable to be an organ donor. This involves a huge amount of collaborative working with departments in the hospital, including radiology, cardiology, anaesthetics, theatres, laboratories and porters. Once recipients have been found, a specialist surgical team come to the hospital and carry out the operation respectfully with the support of the local theatre team and the support of the specialist nurse for organ donation. There are currently over 5,000 people waiting for life-saving transplants. Over the last 8 years, Kingsmill has had 24 donors, which has resulted in 56 life-saving transplants. This simply wouldn't be possible without a huge amount of collaborative working from the staff at Kingsmill. So on behalf of the recipients, a huge thank you.
When we first get word that there's a potential organ donation, there's a lot of organisation that takes place behind the scenes. If the donation is going to take place during the day, then we may have to look at shifting certain lists to different areas to free up a theatre for them to take part in. If it's at night, we're going to require extra staff to be present. We have to prepare for different teams coming into the department. We have a runner who is in theatre with the visiting team, providing the support and equipment. We have an ODP, an operating department practitioner, who will work alongside the anaesthetist. This is the patient who's given the ultimate sacrifice, and we have to treat them with care, compassion, and the utmost dignity at this time. When end of life is declared, we need to do last officers and talk to them as we would our own. The organisation takes a lot of time, and we need to give a lot of support to so many people. We want the teams to take those organs to deliver to other people who are going to benefit from it, and we want our staff to feel they have fulfilled a vital role in their duty.
I'm the recipient of a double lung transplant that took place in 2015. I developed chickenpox, which went into my lungs and severely damaged them. Your life is changed insurmountably. I visited the Freeman Hospital twice for a lung transplant assessment. On the first occasion, I was told that I wasn't sick enough to receive or need a lung transplant at that time. And I can't tell you or explain how devastating that felt. Later on, I started to deteriorate. In 2014, I went back up to the Freeman Hospital, had a lung assessment test, which takes about 2 days. You could need a transplant at any point in your life. Any of your organs could fail. I was amazed to find that they then again rejected me. I felt as if my life had been pulled away from me. The only chance that I knew I'd have of a future life was a lung transplant. However, I did get a call 2 months later, and they did some more assessments and said yes, I was ready to go on the active list. I had one call and it happened at 8:40 in the morning. I was woken up to hear, "Deborah, how are you?" And they said, "Would you like some new lungs today?" I was brought into Kingsmill. I was asked if I'd fancy a helicopter ride up to Newcastle, which I did. It was like 2 things off my bucket list in one day, helicopter ride and a pair of lungs. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, I went down to theatre, and the following morning woke up in intensive care with a new set of lungs. That is now nearly 7 years ago, and I wouldn't be here today talking to you if a beautiful woman who's now in heaven hadn't granted me her lungs.
Very powerful, very powerful story. Thank you very much for everything that you do, your teams. Above all, of course, we thank those who give that gift of life to others and for their families. And the important messages, I think, that come out from this and how we communicate to our patients, to the public, the work that goes on here and how these decisions are taken, I think, with the utmost compassion for the patients and for families. Thank you for that. Are there any questions or comments from other members of the board? Andy.
So I'd echo that there. So I think we've had a strong record at Kingsmill around this, and it's good to see that that's continuing. So thank you for all the work that you do. I just wondered how things are in the light of pandemic and recover out of pandemic now. I'm guessing that's made your lives harder, and therefore are we supporting you in the changes that are required to keep up the reputation that we've had in this field?
I mean, certainly during the period where we were, above capacity during the pandemic, it was a lot harder. I think in the first year of the pandemic, basically more or less all organ donation stopped, but it has built up again. And last year, I think we had 3 donors that proceeded. So it's getting back up there. I think we're almost back to normal now, I'd say. But what I wanted really to show as part of this film was that it is a big logistical exercise that involves a huge number of people within the trust. It's not just ICU, it's theatres and the laboratory staff, and then we get excellent support from the specialist nurses from NHSBT as well.
Emma.
Thank you, thank you for that. I was kind of interested in terms of the aftercare. For some of them give up to help someone else and the families around them. How do they get that aftercare when someone has been a donor and say it's a loved one or a family member, and just wondered what the aftercare was?
So that is a different team which is part of the recipient transplant team, and they'll deal with the families from there. They support them, they visit them, they always share great information that they can later on down the line, and they keep in touch. I know that some people many years after have actually contacted the family members and they have got together, and it's been quite an emotional but a very good experience for both parties. It makes it feel more complete, and to know that out of their tragedy something so good has happened. And so but it is part of a different team, it's part of the transplant team.
Thank you. Very powerful.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that. Just interested in how you think the board can support you and the team and the service, and then specifically, I think it's Organ Donation Week coming up. So how can the board or even myself get involved and help them on
that? I've emailed Joy. Is it Joy Simpson, the part of the stand at the bottom of the. We have a stand at the entry. I understand that obviously during COVID there was still obviously some issues about just getting groups of people around and obviously all that kind of stuff. We were just wondering whether or not we couldn't do it inside, whether we could do it outside under a marquee or something.
What are we after?
I mean, we want support with promoting organ donation.
We're after a set of lungs, aren't we?
Well, yeah.
That's what we're working with our regional organ donation team to get a set of lungs to help promote.
Yeah, I mean, all we can do, because it raises the profile of the trust as well, to promote Organ Donation Week. And I mean, we're planning on running things within ICU and theatres to promote it. We're having a pink nick, which is a pink picnic, because pink's the sort of organ donation colour.
And we've highlighted to the comms team about staff brief and having some focus on that.
I mean, we have an organ donation committee. Dave chairs the committee and the clinical lead. Laura's one of our link nurses. So we're doing fairly well through that. And obviously Dave's our link to the board. So if there is anything that crops up, I'm sure he will.
I'm sure Dave will come back
during
the week or at any time.
I'm happy to support. When I first joined the board as non-exec director, I was chair of the organ donation committee. And so I do remember we had regularly during Organ Donation Week a stand downstairs at slightly different times because we didn't have the legislation on deemed consent.
Yes.
Then, so we were normally recruiting people onto the register, but we did manage to get the lungs at one point. So
we had it for 1 day for 1 year, didn't we?
We did, yeah. So Dave, as chair of the committee, having previously had the lungs when I was chair of the committee, the challenge is on for you to deliver now.
Well, So
we will be as helpful as we possibly can.
So if I can't get the lungs, I'll bring the colon, but that's a different marketing strategy. So we're quite conscious that board sort of sometimes forget. So we just wanted to remind you about signing up for organ donation. So if the laws changed about 3 years ago now.
Just before COVID.
Yeah.
And so in England it's an opting out now expectation. Having said that, one of the challenges, so I just highlighted the conversations. This is a series of conversations that are the most difficult conversations, but even if you haven't expressed your wishes and desires, then during those conversations, the family are sometimes unable to help with that decision or to follow your wishes. So I would just encourage you all and any members of the public who are listening and watching that it is important to convey your wishes to your children, to your relatives, about actually what you might want to happen should this be relevant. And that having that clarity is really, really helpful for us in the situation.
Thank you. Well, we'll certainly pick up all of that in our communications from the board meeting today. Thank you, Laura and Lisa. Thank you for coming and joining us.
Left you a little goodie bag for some pennies.
Again, we know that you like
We love freebies.
you like freebies.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Laura.
Okay, so I suggest what we do is take a 10-minute break now. We return at 2:55 and we can focus on the single oversight framework. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome back to all of the board members and also to members of the public if they've actually been able to access this morning. We have had some technical difficulties, I understand, where members of the public have had some trouble in being able to view the proceedings of the board meeting this morning. So I do apologise for that. We have put out some communications from the trust around that, and hopefully people are able to join us now and we'll be able to view maybe even a recording of this in due course. So thank you. I'd like to move now on to our single oversight framework performance, and I'm going to hand over to our Chief Executive, Paul, to take us through it with executives.
Okay, thank you very much. So the report performs the duty of being the integrated performance report for the month of July. There are 41 indicators reported on within 4 domains. 13 of the indicators are rated red, and their exception reports and no doubt will be covered in the verbal updates that are about to follow. I'll hand over to firstly Dave Solomon, Medical Director, and Phil Bolton, Chief Nurse, to take us through the domain of quality care.
Thanks, Paul. So I'll just start and then I'll bring Phil in and then I'll come back in. So I guess the opening comments I might make is just to draw board's attention to the opening slide in the SOF and the narrative, and to just highlight that difficult balance that we're trying to navigate between that unprecedented activity that we're feeling and providing quality of care. And I might just highlight to board that rightly our focus is on the patient impact of this, but it's important not to forget that a second victim or moral injury impact that we have or we feel within our workforce and our colleagues, and the long-term impact that may have. So with just that as the sort of background, I'll bring in Phil to describe the initial indicators that are highlighted as being off track, and I'll finish with the cardiac arrest one.
Thanks, Dave. So I've stated there's 5 areas which are off track and we've provided exception reports for. If I start with falls, which remains above the national standard, again, we know we're bringing a deep dive to quality committee later this month, but a few things to sort of pull out already in terms of themes. I think recognising the additional capacity we've had open, a couple of extra wards above the additional wards in winter plan, that puts a strain on our resource, including our therapy and support teams. So I think we're seeing patients in some of these areas, particularly our patients in delay, they're not as receiving as much frequent therapy as they could be if they were in a rehab environment, or if there was more capacity within our teams to provide that. So I think it's really important to note that. I think there's also something coming through, a strong theme about our environment. Really proud of our PFI building and the great facilities. We've got 50% cubicles. And I think the loss of our Mansfield community wards for our rehab patients, where we have a different layout, we have areas for people to take part in therapy, we have day rooms, we have therapy gyms. I think particularly again for that cohort of patients that are in the rehab stage or in delay, they're not getting access to that in the same way. So I think there's something there about that facility. How we mitigate some of that, we're looking at things like additional rounding, putting in some activity coordinators to go to patients. I think there's definitely a theme coming through about environmental facilities, and I do hope that Open Mansfield wards come back online, that will have some positive impact. We are seeing a lot more complex patients with delirium, patients needing enhanced care, and that one-to-one supervision, which again in cubicles, that's a big resource on our staffing. Do you want me to take these one at a time, pause, or?
Let's take these 5 and then we'll get back into the discussion.
In terms of the CDF, the MRSA and COVID, again, these are some factors that are off track. This has been going on for some time and it's aligned to some of the national trends we're seeing. That said, CDF, I did verbally highlight to the board we would like to see another month of raised cases. We've had 5 this month, this period. Benchmark against sort of benchmark organisations, and we sit in the middle of the pack, so people are seeing this same rise in CDIF. We're trying to do this system RCA that I mentioned last time, so let's follow the whole patient journey, not just the element with us. We've got a couple of those set up, and NHSE have agreed to do a peer review with us again, just to get some fresh eyes and is there any learning or things we could do differently. Something we have identified, myself and Dave, is the lack of a decamp ward and the ability to run a decamp programme. That's potentially having some impact here. So we'll work with Rachel how do we build that decamp ward back into the winter plan, and next year we could have needed that capacity. That said, Ward 33, there was an area of concern. We've managed to decamp and clean that in stages to see if that has some impact, but definitely a need for a decamp ward. RSA bacteremias, 3 in year against a standard of 0. Again, I mentioned last month there's something there about decolonisation. And the patient incident was a patient that I talked to last time who was homeless, and we didn't think about his ability to decolonise himself and have access to water and showers. There was something about refocusing our teams to the importance of that as well. And then the nosocomial COVID cases, we keep seeing these up and down trends. That's likely to continue. We know in June and July we saw another sort of a period of high incidence, which led to numerous outbreaks. I think we had up to 22 in June. So again in July we still saw high numbers of outbreaks in the organisation, and that's just likely to continue. So that's just the importance of maintaining social distancing and mask wearing. But then back to Dave's point, when we're crowding in ED, and we've got people within that environment where we can't socially distance and we can't do all these things we know we should do, is there something about a lot of our harms that we're seeing here are potentially being caused at the beginning of the patient journey. So it's really important to remember that context that Dave describes. But definitely a need and a drive at the moment just to focus on the fundamentals and the things that are within our gift and control as well. Dave, if you want to add anything today?
No, but I can go to cardiac arrest. Busy period, 6 events in July. Board will remember that relatively recently we took a deep dive through the quality committee around our cardiac arrests and got significant assurance around that. To some degree, I highlight to board this is an opportunity to reflect on some of our good practice. So you can see the detail of 3 of those 6 events given in the report. One was a cardiac arrest which happened outside of, if you like, our environment, but occurred in PC24, secondary to hemorrhagic complications, and we provided support for that. The second case highlighted is a non-cardiac arrest collapse and different causes, and then the third is an ongoing theme around the recognition and the communication of our respect forms across the whole system. And again, this is part of a ICB workstream that we're trying to develop and improve with the ability for all care providers to see everyone's records. I would say in terms of the quality markers, the risk-adjusted outcomes for cardiac arrest are within anticipated and would be rated as green. So those were the things I'd probably just highlight to the board.
Okay, thank you. I'll start with Andy, because I know, Andy, you've got to leave us a bit earlier today.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. So on the fall, Phil, so it's good that we've got the deep dive coming to quality committee. And it's good that we seem to have a low serious harm rate. So the mitigation actions clearly aren't being. But I guess this indicator's been out now for a while, and I'm still not clear how much of this is risk appetite or mobilisation, which is probably appropriate. How much is longer length of stay around the medically fit patients, and how much is not completing basics because of the pressures that we've heard. So I think it's important that the deep dive sheds some light on that. And I wonder if it's time for us to think about whether we need a secondary measure reporting to board, whether that's even falls per spell or patients where our falls assessment process has not been completed. Just wondered what your thoughts were on that. And then in relation to the CDIF, I know that the declean will be a critical thing. It's good that we're making some progress on that. But again, the 2 deaths and the cross-infection are worrying. And I just wondered what themes are coming out of the case reviews around the things we can control, so optimising cleaning, basic IPC measures and antimicrobial resistance.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. So in terms of falls, all those bit you flag are absolutely right. There's lots of components to it. I think some of it is within our control in terms of the fundamentals and our falls practices. Some of it is that patients are more deconditioned. Within the deep dive, hopefully we'll be able to show some of that. I think in terms of the C-diff, again, a whole combination of things. There's definitely some fundamental things in terms of our own practices. Definitely theme in there, Andy, around equipment cleaning, which I know we've had previously. So we've got Clinell and another companies coming in to do that. Additional training. So definitely some, when people are busy, we might wipe down and clean the bed space. I remember to clean on all the equipment and all the things that are associated with that patient. So I'm having a bit of a fundamentals focus, which I flagged when I came back in the organisation. How do we refocus our teams back to all these sort of things, falls, IPC practices? That's certainly our drive over the next 6 months. We're trying to simplify and strip back what we focus on. But yes, there are things within our gift. There are things that are a challenge, aren't they? And sometimes outside of our control. And I think the ED element's definitely a root cause coming through on a lot of these things. Some people are cross-infecting each other potentially in that grounding department and having prolonged periods of stay there. We have to acknowledge and understand that, but recognise what we can influence and change. Answer.
Just the secondary measures, I guess, maybe something we discuss at quality committee.
I'd be keen to show something like we don't focus on minimisation, so we're focusing on the negative aspect of falls, which is important. But how many people who are actually mobilising? We could have a low falls rate and we don't mobilise anyone and keep people in bed, and what are the harms associated with that? Are we actually doing lots of positive mobilisation, and maybe that's why we're seeing an increase? It's trying to triangulate and reference that.
I don't know if it's a secondary measure or a balancing metric that we need, but I think that will come out of the quality committee discussion. But I think the right thing to do is mobilise people. We know the harms that happen when we don't do that, and we have people sat in beds for a long time. But I do think we need to be able to demonstrate that we can show that that is the cause. I think it's quite an important discussion.
There's lots of good local quality improvement going on, which I know Emma or your team has supported, in particular around falls. But again, we need to get better at sharing that across learning. So something really good going on one floor, one ward. We're not consistently sharing that practice yet. So that shared learning is definitely something that is going to be key in addressing.
Okay, and just, I don't know, adding a bit of flavour. So the increase in falls potentially that we've seen is been mirrored, and I've mentioned this before, across a number of other organisations, and so we're linked into NUH, who are linked into Birmingham, who are trying to understand what this increase is. Interestingly, and Andy will know this, but interestingly, the brain fog that we all get when we have COVID is actually a real phenomenon now, and so there's increasing evidence of significant impact. The radiographic changes that we can now see, probably vascular in nature. So actually people who get COVID who are seemingly well actually do have an impact on their cognitive function and their ability to know where they are. So with a number of COVID inpatients, it's not unreasonable, it's not unexpected that we would see an increased number of falls potentially, but what we don't know is to correlate this against those patients, but it's just an interesting bit of background.
Yes, Robert. So two comments from me really. Firstly, it's great to see the BTE risk assessment going up in the right direction. It's been a long time, a different colour, so great to see it green. And secondly, I was interested that you put a target said this before, I really don't like the language of target, but I see you put a target for COVID-19 hospital onset. Target implies it's something you're striving to achieve. I don't think you're striving to achieve COVID hospital onset. But I'm curious as to the rationale of why you picked that particular figure.
That's set.
That's a national.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, it's like most people rather have 0, and
yeah.
How they got that, and
okay.
How realistic it is. Looking at the numbers we have had, it just seems a random number.
Okay. Do we have an out of curiosity? Do we have an equivalent tolerable threshold, which would be my language, for flu? Because I suspect we're going to, I mean, I just think as board we need to be alive to the reality of what this winter holds. I know we're going to come to winter planning later, but I think we're going to see flu and we're going to see COVID. So, you know, is there a tolerable threshold? These just things that the centre are coming out with, presumably.
Well, we don't capture flu infection rates on our SOF.
No,
we can do. But there's there is a difference, isn't there, Barbara, between nosocomial flu and nosocomial COVID. So COVID is much more transmissible than flu.
Yes.
If we maintain social distancing and masks within our organisation, then nosocomial flu transmission should be low.
It should, although I suspect that both might well be endemic over the winter, and we will see the implications of that play out both for us as a trust in the system.
Yes, and the Australia data is suggesting that the flu season is significant, but
early.
A bit short, significant early, but a bit short-lived. So, yeah. so we may do that. I think the impact. So I think your point is well made of, and this is something that I find intellectually fascinating, but that's probably just me. That the skew of our traditional our traditional viral seasons now by COVID, we have no knowledge, understanding and recognition of what the impact is going to be over the next few years. So we saw RSV season skewed very significantly. It was bigger, it lasted much longer than we would normally anticipate. It had at least 2, if not 3 peaks. What happens to RSV in the midst of all of this, we don't know, but it's probably not going to be the traditional beginning of November to the end of November or whatever, and the same is going to be with flu. So I would anticipate we will have a short, very sharp flu season, but very early, and actually it may be earlier than we anticipate even with our vaccination program, but we're trying to mitigate it against that as much as we are able to.
So just final request, can we change the language from target to a tolerable threshold or something? Yeah, because we really don't have an aspiration to get to that level, do we?
No.
And there are a few metrics where we're still using the language about target, and it's not really a target.
Yeah, so I think that's helpful, and why don't Phil and I take that conversation with UKHSA about what might be a tolerable. We do push them on a number of targets or tolerable, and they are great at giving us guidance. But we'll maybe take that outside of this if that's all right.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, thank you. Yes, Andy.
Just the last comment, Claire, before I've got to go. Apologies, but Barbara's point about flu, I think is quite interesting in the context of our modelling around when we think pressures are going to hit us, because it looks like we're going to get an early peak in October and November. That may well precede the vaccination programme. So I think your point about should we be looking not only to prevent infection of patients in our common areas, but also staff. The implication of that, I think, is well made, that we should consider.
And just on that, we have asked if we can start our vaccination programme earlier. We're dependent on vaccine supplies, but just as soon as we get any supplies, we'll be vaccinating in terms of our staff for exactly those reasons. And just finally, Claire, I don't want to necessarily extend it, but I am conscious that I might be too enthusiastic, but the VTE metric that you see seems better. It's a result of the more robust data that we're capturing off our nerve centre investment. So we've been talking about that for a long period of time. I'm hopeful that will continue. I'm hopeful, but it's certainly a good start.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, we'll move on to the people and culture domain, and I'll go to Emma Chalmers, our director of Syncox.
Thank you, Paul. So yes, I shall take the report as read, and I'd like to pull out 2 or 3 key areas, if I may, this month. First one is we continue in terms of preparation, and it was referenced earlier, for our NHS staff survey, which goes live at the beginning of October. We've been undertaking engagement sessions across divisions and with teams, particularly focusing on the 3 areas that we made commitments to, learning from the last staff survey. That was around developing you, valuing you, and caring about you. Through those conversations, we've also been discussing preparation, but also the things that we have done since the last survey. So some examples is regards a relaunch of our reward and recognition, which goes live this month. And then also with regards, we talked earlier about fair recruitment processes. So we've had conversations about recruitment and retention, that being fair and equitable through the Culture Collaborative itself. So that has been much of the focus, and I'm pleased to say that we are ahead. We're confident, and we continue to engage with divisions in having a voice this year through the survey. I'd also like to share with regards insights, so some will be familiar with the quarterly pulse survey, which took place in July. Again, I'm pleased to say that there are some examples where colleagues are still recommending Sherwood as a place to work and also as a place to receive care. And we remain positive in those areas, and we always say and actually aim for being a good place to work and a good place to receive care. Other improvements that we've seen through the quarterly survey is around being involved in improvement across the hospital sites and also feeling valued, which was one of our 3 themes that we focused on for this year. However, there are indications around staff burnout, tiredness and morale, and I think we've talked about some of that with some of the pressures that have been over the last 12 months particularly. So we continue to pay attention to that, and we want to continue to listen and learn what more we can do as an organisation. I'd also like to cover appraisals, noting our exception report in the report for this month. We have got a paper going to one of our senior forums in the organisation with regards increasing compliance and utilising digital to capture appraisals, and then the next stage from that is about the quality of appraisals, so the quality of the conversations that we have. So we do have an active working group focusing on appraisals in the trust, so we are looking at making every effort to improve compliance but also the quality of those appraisals, and we'll continue to work with divisions and line managers about how we can increase that and support colleagues to have an appraisal conversation over the coming months. Finally, I would like to share that we've been part of a first of a kind really for us as a system, and in September we will have a civility, respect and kindness event which is running over a week in September, where we've worked as a system partnership around supporting our health and care system and around creating a culture of civility, respect and kindness. So that's been a very collaborative piece of work where we've got colleagues from each organisation running live sessions, and we've also got some key guests attending throughout the week. And again, I think that's just a demonstration of how we are continuing to try and work in partnership across our health and care community. And this is about having a culture that we can all be proud of and continue to nurture as a health and care system. That's taking place the 21st to the 28th of September. I'll pause there, Chair, if that's okay.
Thank you. Graham.
Just picking up on appraisals, Emma. Recognise when I read this, it gave me a lot of concern. I'm glad we're doing something because it's all about consider. And we've actually been running now for 12 months at a pretty low level on appraisals. And it's having something in place which is actually going to make that difference, because it doesn't feel as though anything is at the moment. Now, whether the digital does or not, I don't know. But yeah, 12 months is quite a long period of time for a constant, relatively low level. And I think it's really important to see that starting to rise again. And so I'm glad something's been done, because when I read the actions and read consider, I thought, hang on a minute, we should have been considering this a long time ago. Why are we not doing something?
Yeah, thank you, Graham. And I think it is, you know, a fair challenge and a constant challenge to us all. We do recognise that our appraisal rate is not where we would like it to be. We do also work in close partnership with our other partners in the system around things that they may be doing. How can we improve, and where do we sit as a system? We do sit favourably. However, and that's why we've had the appraisal working group. So that's colleagues from across the People Directorate and from relevant engagement teams and the learning and development team to look at how we can improve compliance and the quality of. And like I said, there is an options appraisal going to a key forum next week around making that decision. So what we're trying to do, is based on feedback, is colleagues around accessibility to do an appraisal. How can we record that in an easier way that is less onerous on colleagues? But then the next stage from that is about having a quality conversation. So that is going through the appraisals working group. We have also got the leads across all of the professional areas and the services encouraging and trying to look for protected time so that people can have an appraisal. Now, I recognise that there's a point when we can't keep saying it's staff absence, COVID and other pressures. However, they are impacting on people having the ability to have protected time due to the demands that we've had on our services. So we do hope and we do expect that there will be increases in compliance, particularly following if there is an agreement to put an electronic process in place around compliance of appraisals. But we have got, so for example, the nursing midwifery AHPs working with their teams and services, looking at how we can protect time, similarly across other corporate areas. So and that's working closely with the people partnering team. And Rob, I don't know if there's anything specific more you would like to bring in on that.
I think to complement that appreciative inquiry, Graham, was a live conversation we had through the divisional performance reviews last week around what's a reasonable trajectory of turnaround. Particularly recognise, as you rightly pointed out, we've not yet seen any improvements back to pre-pandemic levels around that indicator. And recognising that these conversations need to be meaningful, certainly the ask, and which was supported, was around what trajectory improvement is likely over the next 3 months, and happy to share, particularly when we meet next as a people committee, some of the actions that we have taken to address some of those points you've raised.
I'll hand over to Rob.
Thank you. So I first wanted to touch on some of the, the aspect of our health and wellbeing of our people, recognising there's an exception report in the pack. I think it's fair to say month 4 was rather challenging. So our absence levels increased to 5.4%. Fair increase from our June position. To put this into context, the system's absence level across month 4 was 6.7%. I think we've got to recognise that, during this period we saw the return of face coverings, noting the prevalence of COVID, not just in our workforce, but also the local community. We also saw a period of fairly significant heat that were all component factors for what was quite a challenging period of time, and something I flagged when we met last time. What is encouraging certainly the daily SIP reps that we report, we started to see returning back to what I describe as a normal level of absence across the month of August. For the past 14 days, we've seen absence at around 3.7%, so encouraging signs that we're getting back to where we need to. A big component of all of that is the support that's available to colleagues. So we continue to strengthen our wellbeing champions. We've now got 34 in the organisation, and they reinforce some of the key messages that are available to our workforce. I think it's also worth recognising some of the financial challenges that are live in our community at the moment, and the work that's being done by the financial wellbeing group that's now in place. Prime example, we have citizens advice on site on Tuesday of this week that we're providing time, space and conversation for our colleagues that might be experiencing difficulties at the moment. I think it's also really worth reinforcing the percentage increase on the mileage rate that we've talked about through this forum previously. And we are exploring in partnership with our providers on site around some discounted food provision that might be able to make a difference for individuals. Again, a lot of this links to some of the collaboration work that I've started to work through with David about what can we do in partnership with colleagues across place. And in addition to that, I think it's worth noting we're relaunching some of the menopause work that was so successful a few years ago. We've got an event in October, and that's just to reinforce our commitment as an organisation to that agenda. A few final bits. Obviously, Emma's touched on some of the appraisal reference, but other resourcing indicators remain positive. I think to complement the winter plan that we will discuss, we are planning a recruitment event later in the month just to top up AR Bank, so we've got resource available to us this winter, but also substantive recruitment where we can, and something I'm doing in collaborative with Phil and his team. And I think to note, obviously we've touched on the pay award previously. I can confirm that that will be transacted in the month of September along with arrears, and the organisation is certainly doing some proprietary work around readiness for any potential impact of the pay awards in light of industrial action. So I'll pause there and happily take any questions, Chair.
Thank you. Oh, I think we've been covered. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to timely care, and I'll hand over to Rachel Eddy, our Chief Operating Officer.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start with, I'll just give some headlines around the emergency pathway first. So July, although we saw a slight improvement in the 4-hour target performance, and actually that still benchmarks very well both regionally and nationally, it was a very, very challenging month from an emergency pathway point of view, which culminated in us declaring a system-wide critical incident on the 27th of July. And actually the few days prior to that were probably those greatest pressure within Sherwood, which then followed into the system and culminated in the system-wide approach. As a result of that, we had to open a number of additional beds, and of course this is over and above the beds that we opened last winter that haven't been able to close yet. So we took extraordinary actions. I think there was a lot of learning in that for us in terms of what is possible to mitigate some of that pressure, but it was uncomfortable at the time, so we'll be building that into our policies going forward. I would say that the pressures have been driven by a number of factors. Probably the high level of medically safe patients in our beds is the greater one. We've seen increased attendances, but those are not converting into increased admissions. Largely, I think, because of the success of our STEC services and admission avoidance at the front door. So our STEC benchmarks very, very well nationally. But the admissions are slightly down, but we are seeing some increased length of stay, which is putting further pressure into the system. That pressure has been sustained since, and we've had multiple instances of declaring Local 4 over the course of August as well. But we'll discuss some of that further in the winter planning update later. In terms of the elective pathway, we've performed very well in terms of our long waits relative to other organisations. So we're declaring no 104-week breaches, and we're not forecasting any in coming months either. And we're down to around 60, 78, 18-month plus waiters, which is an improving position and an improving trajectory and on target. We are seeing a small increase on our 52-week waiters, but I think that's to be expected when we're focusing on treating the long waits first and treating people in
order. Once you get to that level on the waiting lists, all of these patients are classified as routine P4s in terms of the surgical prioritisation. There's obviously a huge variance within that, but we're trying as much as we can to bring the longest waiters in first, so we'll see that slight uptick on some of the relatively lower waits. I think another factor in that very long wait backlog now is that even though we've dealt with the very long waits, which are very associated with surgical capacity, as we get further down the list, outpatient starts to play a much bigger part. And so we're seeing increased backlogs now from an outpatient perspective, which we really need to tackle. We've done some fantastic work, I think, around our PIFU pathways, so we're already exceeding the planning guidance target for the year. We're at around 6% versus the 5% target for PIFU, patient-initiated follow-up. I think the biggest area where we need to have real focus is around virtual appointments, where 16%, we're actually quite a bit under the 25% target and actually under compared to our closest neighbour. So some real work to do that. I think the approach we'll take is a very specialty specific one, because this isn't a one size fits all issue. It suits some specialties very well, and we have some very high performing specialties. It's really not very clinically appropriate. So we need a very nuanced approach to this, but I think there's lots of work we can do there. In terms of cancer, we're off track in terms of our 62-day backlog reduction trajectory. I think the last few months have been particularly challenging there. We've had a number of issues both at the start of the pathway in terms of the 2-week waits and further down the pathway in terms of diagnostic and treatment, and that's been compounded, I think, and you'll see in the report that lots of summer leaves that I think has sort of added to existing capacity issues. I would expect to see that start to improve now. I think our theatre capacity will begin to improve as we have anaesthetists and so on coming into post, which is the main barrier to some of that theatre capacity. And I think from a 2-week wait perspective, again, we've had some very specific issues, particularly in dermatology, associated with the move of our clinics around some of the bed requirements where we have to move the discharge lounge, and that is expected to improve over the course of the next month or so as well. So I think we're perhaps at the bottom of the curve, but I'm expecting that to start to improve over the next couple of months. So happy to take any questions.
Maybe a couple of points first from me before we go to colleagues. So looking at the waiting, we've obviously managed to reduce the number of 104-week waits and to clear that. But with the 52-week waits, there will be an increased backlog from that in due course. So we'll start to see some challenges there. What do we know about the risks for some of those patients within those waits? And what communications are we having with patients as well to assess those? So the second issue is, obviously we will have a further discussion on the winter plan, but in relation to the medically safer for discharged patients, clearly we need to have a system plan, and we have so some of the discussions within this, some of the points that are raised within it, don't bring out what some of those system inputs will be that might actually improve the position for ourselves, but also for the rest of the system. And I'm wondering if there's something here that we can share in terms of being able to improve the confidence for public and patients and staff.
Okay, thank you. So first, in terms of the comms to patients, so we've recently, and we've done this at a system level with NUH as well, written to all patients who are on an admitted pathway over a certain over a certain weight, just to check that they are they still want to remain on the list, but also to see if they are concerned about their condition, to make sure they know the way in. We do clinical reviews on patients every 3 months once they go over a year or so. So that there's 3 stages of review. There's the technical one where we just check the pathways right, and the administrative one where the admin staff will check the pathway and potentially communicate with the patient, then if necessary a clinical review, so the patient's condition has deteriorated and possibly needs reassessing in terms of priority, because we are talking mainly about the P4 patients here. Some of them may need to be upgraded to P3, for example. That conversation happens every 3 months, and specialties manage that locally, but we track it quarterly to make sure that it is. In terms of harm, if harm is identified, obviously that will go through the patient safety route. But a lot of work, I think, has been done around just understanding the harm on those pathways. There's not a huge amount of evidence in terms of the sort of longer term effects of the COVID backlogs on harm, and I know that less from Sherwood, just from my previous experience, there haven't been a huge amount of studies done yet, but I think that will start to come out more over the coming year. Just on that point about coming back to the point I said about outpatients, because I think the focus both locally and nationally in terms of the push to get down below 2 years has very much been around for the admitted patients waiting for surgery. I think now we're in a phase where actually the outpatient backlog becomes much more dominant. We don't have very long waits for first appointments here at Sherwood, but within that cohort there will be a lot of patients who are on long-term follow-up. And we do place all of those on our PTL here so that we can track them alongside the new patients, but we do also track them separately to make sure that if they're due at 3 months, 6 months, 9 months and so on, we're very clear on where they are in that pathway. But that's why I think the focus on outpatients has to be much stronger going forward, because it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking it's mainly a surgical capacity issue, and I think as we get down the list it isn't. They'll run side by side. And then your point about the system winter plan. So there's a whole range of initiatives across the system, some still in development. The two biggest ones, which we'll talk about later, are the discharge to assess business case, which is around putting additional home care capacity in, support patients to get out of hospital and into either care homes or their own home and have that assessment where they best need it. That is signed off and approved by the system, and starting at a small scale now won't fully deliver until around March, April time. But that, if it delivers as expected, will have an impact of around 24 beds equivalent on Sherwood. The other sort of big at scale initiative is the virtual wards, which is part of a national programme, which again we are heavily participating in, and again that's predicted to give us a bed equivalent of around 18 beds. There are lots of other smaller initiatives going on, and I think we haven't quite captured the impact of those on Sherwood yet. So that's, again, when I talk through the winter plan later, that's the next phase in terms of do we think any of those, are we confident enough in any of those to actually incorporate them into our winter planning as a mitigation.
Thank you. Other questions, comments? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And our fourth domain is best value care, and hand over to Rich Mills, our Chief Financial Officer.
Thank you, Paul. Hi, everyone. Firstly, apologies, I'm not able to be in the room with everyone this morning. Hopefully you can all hear me okay there. So yeah, the position for July financial position is, as you'd expect, challenged as well. So colleagues have described some of the pressures that we've faced through that period, particularly around the demand, the additional beds that we've been required to put in, as well as the overall workforce losses that increased in month 4. All of that clearly has an impact on the financial position. We have been able to report a break-even position for the month, but this is benefited by elective recovery fund income that it offsets overspends elsewhere. This follows some national guidance regarding the potential clawback of planned DRF. We're still working through the detail of that. There is some ambiguity around the application of it. We're in dialogue with NHS England around that. So the in-month position means that our year-to-date deficit remains at 5.2 million, which is 1.3 million adverse to plan. That's the same as we've described in the past, and largely due to the continued need for that additional bed capacity that Rachel's described. In terms of our forecast, we haven't made any changes to our forecast outturn at month 4. It still shows delivery of the planned £4.7 million deficit for the financial year. The risks to that remain the same as previously described, in particular the financial improvement programme, elective recovery funding, COVID expenditure, and those operational pressures and additional capacity. But the I&E position and the current pressures that we're facing there do also have an impact on our cash. So we're reviewing and monitoring our cash position closely. At the end of month 4, we're in a positive position compared to plan, but our forecast demonstrates sufficient cash to comply with the minimum cash balance required, but it does rely on the delivery of cash release and efficiency savings. So we've got further meetings in over the coming days to review that cash forecast in detail. I'll pause there in case there were any queries around the INE and cash, and then I'll move on to capital and agency. If that's okay.
Okay, question from Graham.
Thanks, Claire, and thanks, Rich. Yeah, we all know the pressures we're going to be under throughout the year on our finances, and it's only going to get worse. You could very much argue the first 4 months are the easy months. It's going to get a lot harder from here on in, and certainly to deliver a break-even position ultimately. What really though gives me concern at this point, because a lot of things are going to be outside of our control, like inflation, energy costs, etc. But our delivery of our FIT programme is so far behind, it gives me no confidence at all at the moment that we've got any chance of getting close to break even. And given we are likely to overrun anyway, if we are going to then show an underperformance in our FIT programme, that isn't going to look very good under scrutiny. So it's how do we get some confidence back that we're going to get our FIT programme on track? Because it doesn't feel like it at the moment.
Yeah, thanks, Graham. If I give a few thoughts on that, and then perhaps invite Emma to offer some thoughts as well. So yeah, you're absolutely right, Graham. The pressures that we've got and the deliverability of that financial improvement programme, it's really challenged. The pressures that we've described all impact on that. The particular one around it is the staffing unavailability and our ability to remove and reduce agency expenditure. We've set up as an ICS, the Nottinghamshire ICS have set up a specific high impact area working group around agency, which Rob and I are involved in, looking at what options we might have around it, agency expenditure, and how we might be able to put additional controls in around that. And that's something that we clearly need to focus on. The other bit I'd say is the plan that we set, the financial plan that we set overall, included the FIT target, but obviously it was all based on a number of assumptions, a number of planning assumptions. In particular, the expectations that we had around urgent care demand, around the number of patients medically fit for discharge that would be in Sherwood beds, and the COVID transmission rates, all had financial benefits associated with them compared to the reality of what we have been facing. So I think there's something about us reviewing where we are and having an honest look at where we are in terms of our financial position in the context of those operational pressures, looking at the current resources, looking at those additional beds that we've got open, having a forward look at our future needs, and focusing our resources on how we make sure we get the best value for money whilst delivering a safe operating environment for our patients over the coming months. I'll pause there. I'm not sure, I can't see Emma actually on the screen.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Thank you, Rich. Yeah, I think what I will add to that is these are the very open, honest conversations that we have had. About 2 weeks ago, we all got together as a senior leadership team in the frame of how do we operate a safe winter whilst delivering financially up until the end of the year. And we had very open, honest conversations, recognising the demands that we faced over the last number of months, recognising the pressures, both within Sherwood but also across the system, but also recognising about how we're using our time and resources to deliver one, operational demand and delivery, but also are doing the business, which is the financial delivery, which is the aspects of quality and safety. And following that session, we've got another one next week where we are, again, as a full senior leadership team, so that's working with all the divisional triumvirates, that's working with the heads of services and other key leads to actually really strip back what is it that we need to focus on and put all our time and energy into delivering a safe winter, but delivering our financial plan. Because there is an absolute clear recognition. I say that in terms of many of the recent conversations that we have had, the workshops, and actually doing it together rather than in isolation. We recognise it's a big risk for us as an organisation. We are all very mindful of that. We're also very mindful of the demand and the availability of workforce and delivering safe care. So we're trying to work together of how we get that balance and deliver both in an effective and an efficient way. So, like I said, that is going to follow on next week, where we've got another, I think it's 3 hours blocked out as a full senior leadership team to try and drill down of what are those top areas of focus. Are we spending time on areas that are not going to give us the greatest gain and benefit for the end of the year? If they are, we need to stop or we need to pause, but we need to do that collaboratively together and then release people to drive some of these initiatives forward. And that's where we're at as an organisation. But like what Rich has also shared, what we're also trying to ensure is that any opportunities that are identified at a system level, one, we just need to recognise that in terms of our delivery plan at the same time. So I know that I do recognise the level of assurance that this does give us at the moment from a financial perspective. However, I do want to just confirm that we are taking it seriously, and so is the senior leadership team as well, and us all supporting our leads as executives in the importance of it. I don't know if anyone else would like to share anything, but I think that's where we're at.
Yeah, so as Emma's described, we've had one session following up with a second one to do exactly that Emma described, which is, so how do we deliver the last 6 months, almost like H2 again, or H2 planning again. What constitutes a safe winter in terms of demand and capacity, but also within the financial constraints that we have, and understanding whether something that we need to have our resources, certainly our corporate resources, targeted to assist the safe and let's say financially sustainable winter for our operational and clinical teams.
Steve wants to come in as well.
Did Graham want to come back?
Great, do you want to come back?
Just come back a little bit on that, particularly in Andrew's absence. I think it's really important the next Finance Committee that we really have an in-depth look at this area across the whole of the finance and the forecast, but with particular reference around FIP and what is realistically deliverable, and understanding what the areas that are being addressed and where the progress is on them. So actually to see the plan in some detail and the outcomes of obviously the discussions you're going to be having.
Yeah, that's fine.
I think will be really useful, and also then I suspect it will be useful to see a summary of that coming back perhaps to the private board, the next private board after Finance Committee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Steve.
Yeah, I think Graham's covered a bit of it, to be honest. And I guess the trouble is getting to that assurance as opposed to reassurance. I mean, to be honest, that's a conversation we could have had last February about the start of this year. So for us as a board, that kind of doesn't move me forward in terms of assurance at all. But I think that's kind of what we need to see. And difficult though this might be, I think this kind of when do we start for next year, because we're stuck in this trap again of we're 4 or 5 months into the year trying to galvanise people to do all the right things, work together, etc. But there's no visible pipeline that's going to make that difference. So I know it's hard to increase the demands when this is difficult anyway, but we're just going to be sat here next year in a worse position unless we're able to get on top of what Graham's just described and then start thinking about, well, what are the things that might work a bit longer term. So I mean, thank you for it. I do appreciate it's really hard to do, so it feels really tough to be saying that, but we're just, we know how difficult it's going to get.
Thank you.
Okay, do you want to carry on, Rich? Capital?
Yeah, no worries. Sorry, just another point, just probably on what Steve's just described there, actually. I think you're absolutely right, Steve, in terms of getting ahead. So the executive team yesterday heard from the planning oversight group about the timetable and the plans to start developing our plans for next year and the year beyond that as well. So obviously a key element of that will be the transformation and efficiency programme. The other thing that we're doing over the next month is the HFMA sustainability audit with our internal auditors, 360 assurance. So that'll be a detailed review of our kind of financial sustainability, and the hope is that there'll be some recommendations and work streams that come out of that as well that should help to support the development of that programme at an earlier stage. So yeah, I'll move on to capital. Just briefly on capital then. So we've reported expenditure of 800,000 or against the plan of 1.8 million. Some of the phasing of the plan contributes to the year to date underspend of 3.4. We are still experiencing challenges in terms of fulfilling our capital plan at the moment. We have a capital oversight group in place at the trust that continues to monitor progress, and our meeting in September will be dedicated largely to a review of that forecast and including the potential mitigations to recover some of that slippage that we've got.
Thank you, Rich. No comments on him?
Just in terms of just thinking about the capital one, I mean, we've escalated this with Project O with CNH to try and break it. There's a lot of issues around how variations, which is new capital items, are taken forward, whether that's being delivered by Skanska or whether that's hopefully being delivered in the future by P22 or P23. And I think it's fair to say it's progressing, but we're a way away from actually getting things properly resolved. So I actually think we're probably a little bit optimistic in terms of still saying a forecast outturn of being able to deliver everything this year. It's going to be hard work, and that's without the general issues there are within the industry anyway in terms of supplies and costs. It's just something to bear in mind.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Another good discussion. And obviously, as we have covered a large number of the large part of the rest of the agenda, I'm now going to move on to the outstanding service, the speech and language therapy pilot, and hopefully we've got a video lined up for that. In the meantime, while they're just there's obviously slightly ahead there. While they're doing that, perhaps we can have a brief discussion on communications to the wider organisation. Paul, do you have any particular thoughts?
I've got a list as we've gone through. So we've received a regular maternity update and assurance on progressing Ockenden requirements. Good discussion around Guardian Safe working report around and the discussion around how we can have a board support minimising the number of gaps that see on the rotas. In terms of the RES and DES reports, we noted progress budget and the increased reporting of harassment, bullying and abuse and the actions that were taken in response to that. Approved a revision to the Constitution. There was the organ donation patient story, and organ donation week is week commencing the 19th of September. Delivery concerns for our financial improvement plan, and noted that we needed to further scrutiny of that. And then I'm hoping that we'll be able to reflect upon the pilot in ED that we're about to see with the speech and language therapy.
Excellent. Yes, and a couple of other issues potentially around encouraging, thinking about the flu vaccine campaigns and discussion that we've had about that. But once that's up and running and just getting people prepared, the covered in the charitable funds was the Newark breast One-stop clinic now being in operation, and that might again be something promoting through for members of the public too.
I think specifically on that one, if you don't mind, Claire,
Yes.
there was a desire from the service to ramp it up and then launch it.
Yes.
And I'm not sure if that's where they are yet.
Right.
So they wanted to have it successfully working before they made a launch. So yeah, if you
that might be for the next month.
Maybe if we just check in if they're ready for that. Yeah, thank you.
We'll check on that one. Excellent. Okay, let's go to our presentation then on speech and language therapy.
My name is Robin Goddard. I'm a highly specialist speech and language therapist, and I work in the speech and language therapy department at Kingsmill Hospital. So I trained to be a speech and language therapist. I did a master's degree in speech and language therapy. I qualified in 2017, and since then I've worked in different community and hospital settings in different places in the country. So I've worked in Kent, down in Surrey before I came to Sherwood in April. So we're doing a 4-week trial of having a dedicated speech and language therapist working in A&E, EAU, Emergency Assessment Unit, and same-day emergency care. So that involves having a speech and language therapist down in those areas for 4 weeks, Monday to Friday, 8 till 4 p.m. And we're available to do any specialist assessment of communication and swallowing impairments for any patients who have those needs. So that could be people who've had a stroke, other conditions like dementia, progressive conditions like Parkinson's or multiple sclerosis, anybody who has issues with communication or swallowing with to support. So there's two sides to the job. So there's the side that deals with the swallowing, and then the side that deals with the communication. So the advantage of having early input from a communication perspective is that if people have had, for instance, a stroke, the evidence shows that the quicker we can respond and give people therapy, the better their chances are of improving, and it reduces the frustration for patients when they don't have a way to communicate. We can help with assessing their needs and providing alternative ways for them to communicate, like pictures or writing things down. So it reduces the frustration for staff and patients trying to communicate with each other, so that staff know what patients are trying to say, and it can help with family members feeling reassured that they know how to communicate with their loved ones as well, and it gives them hope that they can improve and there's things that we can do to help, because it's really frustrating to suddenly not be able to communicate in the way that you usually do. Part of the trial is to assess the impact, and we're looking at patient safety, so trying to make sure that people are being given the correct food and drink, the correct support for their communication and swallowing difficulties, and reducing the amount of incidents that might occur, because sometimes people come in and they're supposed to be on a modified diet, for example, and the nurses aren't aware. If we're there at that point, we can highlight that and find out what people should be eating and drinking to keep them safe and reduce their risk of choking. It's also from a patient experience point of view, so helping people to feel less frustrated if they've got communication problems, get them eating and drinking sooner, which will all improve the patient experience, and also trying to ease the pressure on our urgent and emergency services, because there's been patients where we can send them home rather than admitting them to hospital. So it helps with the pressures on our system at the moment, and trying to avoid some hospital admissions as well, and hopefully that can improve the experience for the patient and also reduce the pressures on the department and result in some cost savings for the trust as well. I think it's been a really fantastic new service. It's really innovative and pioneering, and not something that is very commonly done. And I think it's really great to have a speech and language therapist working in the emergency department for lots of different reasons, and it's been really encouraging to see the support from the doctors and the nurses saying that it's a fantastic service to have, and they really appreciate our specialist input and knowledge about swallowing and communication at an earlier stage in the patient's journey. It helps them to plan the patient's treatment better, and results in a better, safer outcome for the patient.
I'm hoping that was actually the ending, because I just felt slightly abrupt. It was, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Robin's fantastic, and this is something that they self-generated as a very small team, and we give that more development on quality improvement, that real quality improvement in action. That's the thing we're talking about, the connectivity. It's only a 4-week pilot, got some real good evidence in there, so it's for us as a team to work out how and if we can support that. Following on from the last conversation about finance and things, but there's clearly savings in there, there's bed savings, the patient experience element. I just think it's 4-week pilot, it's just been really, really well received. It's really good.
Excellent.
I just mentioned that that's a service that we've relatively recently brought back in-house into Sherwood.
March was it? Yeah.
Which allows us to develop activities such as this, which we previously didn't have.
Well, I think we can add that to our list of communications, and that the board want to ensure I've recorded our thanks to the team for this. Okay, so I'm not aware of any other business. Simply to say once again, apologies for some of the technical and communications challenges that we've had with this meeting being broadcast today. The date of our next meeting will be the 6th of October, and all being well, again in the boardroom and communicating across teams to members of the public. So I'd like to declare the meeting closed. I'm not aware of any questions from members of the public having come in, so I'll move to the resolution to close the public session of the meeting in accordance with section 1 part 2 of the Public Bodies Admissions to Meetings Act 1960. Members of the board are invited to resolve that representatives of the press and other members of the public be excluded from the remainder of this meeting, having regard to the confidential nature of the business to be transacted, publicity on which would be prejudicial to the public interest. Thank you very much for attending public board. I'll give you a 5-minute break, and then we'll open private board.